Clyde Barrow was born in 1909 to a poor farming family in Ellis County, Texas. His parents, Henry and Cumi Barrow, raised 7 children while barely making ends meet. In search of a better life, the family moved to Dallas. But the harsh conditions and life on the streets quickly drew young Clyde into petty crime. His first run-ins with the law began with minor incidents, being detained for returning a rental car late, then for stealing turkeys. However, his crimes gradually became more serious: car theft, shoplifting, and assault. By the age of 20, he had an impressive list of offenses behind him. Bonnie Parker was born in 1910 in Texas to a working-class family. After her father's death, her mother moved the children to a suburb of Dallas. Bonnie was a smart and dreamy girl who loved literature, wrote poetry, and dreamed of the stage. At 16, she married Roy Thornton, but their union quickly fell apart. Her husband went to prison, and Bonnie returned home. Working as a waitress, she continued to write poems about fate, loneliness, and love, unaware that she herself would soon become part of a legend that inspired films. Their fateful meeting took place in January 1930 at the home of a mutual acquaintance. Clyde came to visit, saw Bonnie, and, according to eyewitnesses, instantly lost his head. Mutual sympathy flared up between them, and soon a strong feeling developed. A few weeks after they met, Clyde was arrested, but Bonnie did not turn her back on him. She even helped him escape by passing him a gun. He was caught again and spent 2 years behind bars. When he was released, he was a hardened man, convinced that he would never be able to return to a normal life. In early 1932, Clyde and an accomplice began committing armed robberies to raise funds and free their friends from Easton Prison, where he himself had once been humiliated and abused. Bonnie soon joined them. This was the beginning of a gang that later included Raymond Hamilton, W.D. Jones, Clyde's brother Buck Barrow, and his wife Blanche. Their first attacks were clumsy, but over time the group gained experience and became more confident. In April 1933, they stopped in Joplin, Missouri to rest. But the police, acting on a tip, discovered their hideout. The attempt to arrest them turned into a shootout, in which 2 officers were killed. Bonnie and Clyde managed to escape. Photographs taken by members of the gang were left at the scene. When the pictures appeared in the newspapers, they turned the criminals into a national sensation. In the photo, Bonnie posed with a cigar and a revolver, and Clyde stood next to her with a smirk on his face. It was these images that gave rise to the myth of gangster love and rebellious romance during the Great Depression. However, their real life was far from Hollywood legends. Bonnie and Clyde lived hand to mouth, sleeping in cars and abandoned houses, constantly hiding from the police. Every day was a struggle for survival. Any stop at a gas station or cafe could be fatal. During their escape, they were credited with the deaths of at least 12 people, including 9 police officers. Once, their car crashed and caught fire. Bonnie suffered severe burns, after which she could hardly walk. But Clyde continued to carry her with him, caring for her and helping her. Despite physical pain and despair, they did not give up and continued to hide, moving from state to state. In January 1934, Clyde organized a daring escape from Easton Prison, freeing several inmates. This caused a huge stir. Texas state authorities tasked legendary former Ranger Frank Hamer with assembling a special team to take down Bonnie and Clyde. Hamer spent a long time studying the gang's travel routes, observing the criminals' relatives, and determined that the couple often traveled between Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. Raymond Martinez Fernandez was born on December 17th, 1914, in Hawaii to a family of Spanish immigrants. Shortly after his birth, his parents moved to Connecticut, where the family lived modestly. When Raymond grew up, he went to Spain, worked on his uncle's farm, got married, and became the father of 4 children. Later, he left his family to seek a new life. During World War II, Fernandez served in the Merchant Marine and collaborated with British intelligence, returning to the United States after the war. However, peaceful life did not work out for him. Raymond ended up in prison for petty theft, where he met an inmate who was interested in mystical practices. Under his influence, he came to believe that he could use suggestion and charm to control people. After his release, Fernandez began deceiving women who placed ads in newspaper dating columns. Presenting himself as a charming widower, he gained their trust, promised marriage, and then disappeared, taking their savings with him. His scams continued until he met a woman with whom their fates became intertwined in the darkest way. Martha Jewel Beck was born on May 6, 1920, in Florida. Her childhood was difficult. Because of her weight and introverted nature, the girl was often the subject of ridicule. Relationships in the family were difficult, and Martha grew up lonely and insecure. After receiving a medical education, she worked as an assistant in a funeral home, then as a nurse in an army hospital. Later, left alone with a child, she invented a story about the death of the child's father to elicit sympathy from her neighbors. Her subsequent marriage also turned out to be unsuccessful. After the divorce, she became increasingly withdrawn, finding solace in romantic magazines and movies. One day, Martha placed an ad in the Lonely Hearts column. The response came from Raymond Fernandez. When they met, there was an instant connection between them. Raymond came to see Martha in Florida, and she saw him as her destiny. When he left, she quit her job and left her children to join him in New York. Her devotion touched Fernandez, and she soon learned how he made his living. Instead of turning away, Martha accepted his lifestyle and became his accomplice. She gave her children to a charity and devoted herself entirely to Raymond. The couple began traveling around the country, responding to letters from women who dreamed of marriage. To gain trust, Martha pretended to be Raymond's sister, and together they created the impression of a respectable family. But behind this facade lay deception. Women lost money and jewelry, and in some cases this led to tragic consequences. The first known victim was 66-year-old Janet Fay, who believed the promises of marriage. She moved in with Raymond in his house on Long Island. But soon a conflict arose between the couple and the woman. Martha, overcome with jealousy, hit Janet, and Raymond finished the job. They hid the body in the basement, but Janet's relatives raised the alarm, and the couple fled in a hurry. The next victim was Delphine Downing, a young widow from Michigan who was raising a young daughter. She took in the traveling brother and sister without suspecting who they really were. When Delphina began to worry and ask questions, Raymond gave her a sedative to avoid a scandal. However, Martha, seeing that the situation was getting out of control, committed another rash act. After that, Raymond killed the woman, and a day later, the child. The couple remained in the house for several days until neighbors reported strange noises and the disappearance of the owner to the police. Gerald Armand Gallego was born in Sacramento, California, into a family where violence and neglect were commonplace. His father was convicted of murder, and his mother earned a living through casual relationships. His childhood was spent in poverty and fear. beatings, moving from place to place. Indifference. As a teenager, Gerald realized that power is achieved through control and force. He stole, cheated, fought, and by the age of 20, his life had become a series of arrests and prison terms. Charlene Adele Williams, on the other hand, grew up in a well-to-do family in Stockton. Her father held a high position, and her mother was gentle and caring. The girl grew up smart and dreamy, but adult life brought disappointment. Failed marriages, alcohol addiction, and a feeling of emptiness. When she met Gerald in 1977, she thought he was a strong and confident man who would give her support. In reality, he became someone who completely subjugated her. Their relationship quickly turned into an addiction. Gerald instilled in her the idea that the world was divided into those who ruled and those who obeyed, and that Charlene should help him prove his superiority. She was afraid of him, but she couldn't leave. Gradually, she became part of his dark ideas, not out of malice, but out of fear and inner weakness. From the end of 1978, they began traveling around California, choosing random girls at clubs, in parking lots, at stores. Charlene approached them first, smiled, and offered them a ride. Gerald stayed on the sidelines watching. Their trusting manner of communication turned into a trap. No one suspected that behind the woman's calm exterior lay danger. Their crimes continued for almost 2 years. The police were unable to establish a pattern for a long time. Different cities, different states, different victims. Gerald derived satisfaction from his power over people, while Charlene lived in fear and submission. She no longer knew how to resist. It all ended in 1980 when a witness remembered their license plate number. The police quickly found the couple. Gerald resisted arrest, shouting that he had been framed. Charlene remained silent, but then agreed to cooperate with the investigation. In court, she appeared to be a broken woman. She said that Gerald controlled her life, convincing her that their actions were part of a higher mission. Prosecutors argued that she was not just a victim, but an active participant. After all, she was the one who communicated with the girls, leading them to their deaths. Her confession became key evidence against Gerald. In 1983, he was found guilty and sentenced to death, and the sentence was later upheld in Nevada. Charlene received 16 years in prison. Gerald died in 2002 in his cell, never having awaited execution. Charlene was released in 1997. She changed her name and disappeared from the public eye. Later, in a rare interview, she said, "They died, and I remained. But sometimes I feel like I'm living with their shadows." Elton Coleman was born in Waukegan, Illinois, into a poor family that lacked attention and care. His mother was rarely at home, and he was raised by his elderly grandmother. He spent his childhood on the streets, where he learned early on that strength and fear give power. As a teenager, Coleman committed petty crimes, and as an adult, he spent his life between prison and freedom, becoming increasingly violent. Psychiatrists later noted that he had serious personality disorders, bouts of aggression, and a pathological desire for control. Deborah Brown, his future accomplice, was born in 1962 into a large family. After a childhood head injury, she developed cognitive impairments, but her life was peaceful. She had a job, an engagement, and plans for the future. Everything changed when she met Elton in 1983. He was a smooth talker, promising love and protection, convincing her that they were meant for each other. For the vulnerable Deborah, this was the beginning of complete submission. She left home and followed him, not realizing that she was becoming part of his destructive path. In the spring of 1984, Coleman, hiding from the investigation, began a series of crimes with her. They traveled across the Midwest, from Wisconsin to Ohio, and in each city, there were new episodes of violence and robbery. The victims were mostly women and children, whom the couple deceived, taking advantage of their trust. Elton was charming and smiling. Deborah was quiet, polite, and seemingly harmless. People did not suspect that behind this facade lay mortal danger. Their crimes were chaotic. Kidnappings, assaults, murders. A 9-year-old girl died in Kenosha, and a woman and her child died in Toledo. In other cities, they tied up families and robbed their homes. The disappearance of 15-year-old Honey Story was particularly high profile, for which Coleman was later sentenced to death. In 2 months, the couple crossed 6 states, leaving a trail of fear behind them. He considered himself above the law, while Deborah lost her will and personality more and more. On July 20th, 1984, they were arrested in Illinois. An acquaintance recognized them from a photo and notified the police. Officers found the couple in a park, sitting quietly in the stands. During a search, Deborah was found to be in possession of a weapon, while Elton had a knife in the victim's belongings. The arrest went smoothly, as they realized there was nowhere left to run. The investigation was conducted in several states. A court in Ohio was the first to hand down a verdict. Elton Coleman was found guilty and sentenced to death, and Deborah Brown received the same punishment, which was later commuted to life imprisonment. During the trial, Deborah appeared detached, sometimes smiling as if she did not fully understand what was happening. Coleman behaved defiantly, blaming society and the press, not himself. He later wrote a letter of apology, but his words were not taken seriously. In 2002, he was executed in an Ohio state prison. Deborah Brown survived. In Ohio, her sentence was commuted to life imprisonment, and in Indiana, to 140 years. Years later, she admitted her guilt and apologized to the families of the victims in a video statement. She is currently serving her sentence without the possibility of parole. Carol Mary Bundy was born on August 26, 1942, in California. Her life was difficult from the very beginning. Her parents abused alcohol, and her home was a place of constant quarrels. After her mother's death, her father began to treat his daughter cruelly, and from the age of 11, Carol lived in an atmosphere of fear and humiliation. Later, she was placed in foster care, where she again faced indifference. By the age of 17, Carol was looking for protection rather than love in men, so she married a 56-year-old man, hoping for peace. But the marriage turned out to be another trap. The rest of her life became a series of failed relationships and attempts to start over. By the time she met Doug Clark, she was 37. Behind her were 3 marriages, 2 children, and a feeling of hopelessness. She lived in Burbank, worked as a nurse, and appeared to be a reserved woman, but inside she was lonely and devastated. Sometimes Carol visited the country bar Little Nashville, where she met singer Jack Murray, a married man who became her lover. Breaking up with him left her feeling desperate. It was then, in the same bar, that she met Doug Clark, a charming, confident man who knew how to make an impression. He quickly moved in with her, and Carol believed she had finally found the one. But very soon, the relationship took a sinister turn. Clark was obsessed with dark fantasies and a thirst for power. Carol, accustomed to obeying, began to play along, afraid of losing him. Gradually, they began to turn these dangerous ideas into reality. In the spring of 1980, the couple began going out at night on the streets of Los Angeles meeting young women. They acted without a plan, randomly, impulsively, and soon moved from conversation to murder. Investigators later said that they were not motivated by money, but by a perverse sense of control and power. When Carol suspected that Jack Murray might tell the police, she panicked and killed him. After that, she couldn't take it anymore. She called the police herself and confessed. Her confession revealed not only this crime, but a whole series of murders committed together with Clark. On August 11, 1980, Carol Bundy was arrested at her home, and Clark was soon detained as well. At first, she claimed that she had acted under his influence, but later admitted that she had personally killed Murray. Investigators found that she had been present at other murders, including the case of an unidentified woman found a year later. The trial lasted almost 3 years. In 1983, Carol pleaded guilty and agreed to testify against Clark, which saved her from the death penalty. She was sentenced to 52 years in prison. In prison, she behaved calmly and helped other inmates. But until the end of her life, she claimed that she did not enjoy what she had done. Doug Clark was found guilty and sentenced to death. He spent more than 40 years on death row and died in 2023. Carol Mary Bundy died on December 9, 2003, at the age of 61, of heart failure in a women's prison in Central California. Alvin Howard Neely Jr. and Judith Ann Adams. Neely are one of the most sinister couples in U.S. criminal history. Their names have become synonymous with a destructive relationship in which love and violence merged into one. Together, they committed kidnappings and murders, acting cold-bloodedly and without remorse. Alvin was born in 1953 in Georgia to a poor family that offered neither warmth nor support. As a teenager, he was already in trouble with the police for car theft and assault. By the age of 26, he was accustomed to a life of crime and despised weakness. Then, he met 15-year-old Judith Adams, a shy girl from Tennessee who had lost her father and was looking for protection. A dependent relationship immediately developed between them. He saw submissiveness in her. She saw strength and confidence in him. Together they ran away and began a life outside the law. Judy quickly picked up Alvin's habits. They robbed stores and motels and attacked people. Even pregnancy didn't stop her. She participated in raids until she was sent to prison, where she gave birth to twins. To those around her, she seemed like the victim of an adult man. But later, it became clear that cruelty was growing within her. In the fall of 1982, the couple began a series of crimes that shocked the country. Their first victim was 13-year-old Lisa Ann Milliken, a foster child. On September 25th, Judith and Alvin spotted her at a shopping mall in Georgia, tricked her into leaving with them, and took her to a motel in Alabama. The girl was held captive for several days. When an attempt to poison her failed, Judith shot her and threw her body off a cliff. Later, she herself called the police and told them where to look for her, as if wanting to prove her own power. A week later, the couple attacked Janice Chapman and her fiancé, John Hancock. The man was wounded but survived and told the police about the attackers. Janice was taken away and killed at the same motel. The police caught the couple a few days later. They were found in Tennessee. Alvin agreed to cooperate with the investigation and avoided the death penalty, receiving a life sentence. Judith went on trial in March 1983. She had given birth to her third child while behind bars and remained calm as she described her actions in detail. The jury recommended life imprisonment, but the judge handed down the death penalty. Thus, the 18-year-old woman became the youngest person in the United States to be sentenced to death. In 1999, the governor of Alabama commuted her death sentence to life imprisonment, citing the jury's opinion. The decision caused public outrage, and in 2003, state authorities passed a special law permanently denying her the right to parole. Alvin Neely died in prison in 2005 without expressing remorse. Judith Neely is alive and serving a life sentence at Julia Tutwiler Women's Prison.
Psychiatrists noted that she was fully aware of her actions and derived emotional satisfaction not from cruelty, but from a sense of control.
James Clifford Carson, who later called himself Michael Bear, and Susan Barnes, known as Susan Bear, became one of the most fanatical couples in the history of American criminalistics. Their crimes, a mixture of religious madness, mysticism, and fanaticism, led to 3 murders, which they justified as a fight against evil. James was born in Iowa in 1950. He got an education, married, and became a father. But by the mid-1970s, everything had changed. He became fascinated with esotericism and ideas of spiritual purification, and began talking about unclean people and a new order. His wife feared for their child and left him. Soon he met Susan Barnes, a woman 9 years his senior. She had also gone through a divorce and was fascinated by mystical ideas. Together they created their own closed world, with their own ideas about good, evil, and the mission to purify the earth. James began calling himself Michael Bear, and Susan called herself Susan Bear.
Traveling through Europe, they lived a nomadic life. And upon returning to the United States, they settled in San Francisco, among the remnants of hippie culture and spiritual communities. Their views became even more radical. Michael wrote manifestos about a new revolution and claimed that God had commanded them to destroy witches, people they considered to be the embodiment of evil. In the spring of 1981, 23-year-old Karen Barnes, a budding actress, was living in their home. She began to annoy Susan, who declared that the girl was possessed by evil. Soon, Karen was found murdered, with severe injuries, and the Carsons disappeared. They later confessed, claiming that they had acted by the will of God. After that, they wandered between states, living in the mountains and on farms. In 1982, on one of the California farms, they had a conflict with a worker named Clark Stevens, whom Michael shot dead.
The body was hidden, and a manifesto with threats to famous people was found in their house. Despite being wanted, the couple remained at large for a long time. In January 1983, they met John Heller while hitchhiking. During the trip, Susan suddenly accused him of evil intentions. A fight broke out, and Michael fired a shot. Witnesses reported the attack, and the criminals were soon arrested after a chase. During questioning, the Carsons did not deny their guilt. On the contrary, they demanded attention. They held a press conference declaring that they were warriors of light and acted in the name of God. Their words shocked the country. At the trial, the couple appeared confident and even contemptuous. They rejected their lawyers and tried to address the jury directly, claiming that they cannot be judged by human laws. The court found them guilty. They received 25 years for the murder of Karen Barnes, 50 years to life for the death of Clark Stevens, and 75 years to life for the murder of Heller. They never expressed remorse. Even after decades in prison, the Carsons continued to write letters and give rare interviews in which they spoke of their mission and purity of purpose. Michael is serving his sentence at Mole Creek Prison, and Susan is in the Central California Women's Prison. They were called the San Francisco Witch Killers. They did not kill for money or revenge. Their crimes were dictated by their belief that they were cleansing the world. This story is an example of how religious madness, fueled by drugs and loneliness, can turn ordinary people into fanatics willing to kill in the name of their own insane god.
Cynthia Lynn Kaufman was born on January 19th, 1962, in St. Louis, Missouri. Her childhood was difficult. Her father left the family, and her mother, unable to cope with her worries, once tried to give her children away to strangers. Cynthia grew up in an atmosphere of instability and loneliness, which formed in her a painful need for love and protection. By the age of 18, she got married, hoping to find peace. She gave birth to a child, but soon the marriage fell apart. In search of a new life, she moved to Arizona, where she met the man who changed her destiny, James Gregory Marlowe. He had recently been released from prison and was charismatic and domineering. For Cynthia, he became a symbol of strength, but in reality, he was a source of subjugation. The relationship quickly turned into dependence. Marlowe suppressed her will, isolated her from the world, and controlled her every move.
At the trial, the defense would later claim that Cynthia suffered from victim syndrome, a condition in which a person stops believing in the possibility of salvation and becomes submissive. In the fall of 1986, they began a series of crimes. First, petty thefts and carjackings, then kidnappings and murders. The first victim was 32-year-old Sandra Neer from Costa Mesa, California. She was kidnapped on October 11th and was soon found dead. Later, Pamela Simmons, Corinne Novus, and Lionel Murray disappeared. All of them victims of this couple. The police were unable to connect the crimes for a long time, until Cynthia and James were arrested at a motel in November 1986. She looked emaciated and frightened. During questioning, she confessed that she had been present at the murders and had acted under threat from Marlowe. The trial became a high-profile event. Prosecutors claimed that Kaufman participated voluntarily, while the defense insisted that she was broken and lived in constant fear. Witnesses testified about beatings and humiliation, about how Marlowe instilled in her the idea of a spiritual union, justifying the violence. In 1990, both were sentenced to death. Cynthia became the first woman in California to receive such a sentence after the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1977. Later, in 1992, she was found guilty of another murder, adding a life sentence. Today, Cynthia Lynn Kaufman is on death row at the Central California Women's Institution. In rare interviews, she says she has realized how destructive her addiction was and regrets her past. Erica Elaine Seyfried and Benjamin Adam Seyfried were one of the most sinister couples of the early 2000s. Behind their respectable exterior lay a mixture of jealousy, cruelty, and a thirst for power that ended in tragedy. Their stories showed how addiction and power games can turn into a nightmare where human life loses its value. Erica was born on February 3rd, 1978, in Pennsylvania, into a well-to-do family. She was smart, hardworking, an excellent student, and an athlete. She attended Mary Washington College, and those around her considered her a model of discipline. No one could have imagined that a few years later, she would find herself at the center of one of the most notorious murders in Maryland history. Benjamin, born in 1977 in Iowa, was her opposite. Impulsive, with a thirst for risk and control. After serving in the Navy SEALs, he was discharged for disciplinary reasons.
Having lost his status, he began to seek confirmation of his power in subjugating others and controlling Erica. They married in 1998. Outwardly, they were a beautiful couple with their own business. But behind this facade lay constant conflict outbursts of aggression and psychological games. Their relationship was built on dependence. He suppressed, she played along, turning violence into part of their personal drama. In May 2002, the Seyfrieds came on vacation to Ocean City, Maryland, where they met Joshua Ford, 32, and Martha Cratchley, 51, a friendly couple from Virginia, at the Secrets Club. The evening was fun, and Erica invited them to her apartment. During the night, she suddenly accused the guests of stealing her purse. This accusation was the beginning of the tragedy. According to the investigation, the tension escalated into violence. Joshua and Martha were killed, and their bodies were hidden. 9 days later, their remains were found in Delaware, and their documents and personal belongings were found at the Seyfrieds' home. The arrest happened by chance. A few days later, the police detained them for attempting to rob a restaurant. During a search of Erica's home, the victim's driver's licenses were found. At the police station, she confessed to the crime, claiming that she had acted under pressure from her husband. Benjamin, on the other hand, claimed that he had only helped to cover up the evidence. The trial caused a huge public outcry. The young, well-groomed couple looked more like advertising models than criminals. Witness Melissa Sealing said that a few weeks before the murder, the Seyfrieds had tried to perform a similar ritual on her, but she managed to escape. In 2003, the sentences were handed down separately. Benjamin Seyfried received 30 years for second-degree murder, and Erica Seyfried received life imprisonment plus 20 years.
The court found her to be the instigator of the events. All attempts to appeal the verdict were unsuccessful. In 2010, Benjamin filed for divorce. He repeatedly sought parole, but was denied. Erica Seyfried is still serving her life sentence in a Maryland women's prison. A reminder of how twisted love and thirst for power can destroy not only the lives of others, but also one's own.
Faye Della Copeland and her husband Raymond W. Copeland went down in American criminal history as the oldest couple ever sentenced to death. Their crimes, committed in the quiet town of Mooresville, Missouri, shocked the country with the contrast between their outward respectability and the cold calculation with which they killed people for profit. Raymond, born in Oklahoma in 1914, grew up in poverty and engaged in petty crimes from a young age, ranging from cattle rustling to check forgery. After one of his stints in prison, he met Faye Wilson, a kind and modest girl who grew up in a religious family. They married in 1940. She became a patient wife and mother of several children. But life with her hot-tempered husband turned into fear and dependence for her. Because of his criminal record, Ray had to change his place of residence frequently. By the 1980s, the couple had settled in Mooresville, where they rented a farm and led a secluded life. To their neighbors, the Copelands were ordinary elderly farmers. But behind the facade lay a scheme that soon turned into a series of murders. Ray came up with a way to make money illegally. He hired homeless men, promising them work and shelter. He forced them to buy livestock with forged checks, and then got rid of them to cover his tracks. For a long time, no one noticed the disappearances. His victims were people with no relatives or documents. Everything changed in 1989, when a worker named Jack McCormick managed to escape from the farm and told the police that he had seen human remains. At first, they didn't believe him, but an investigation revealed that Ray had a history of fraud. Soon, a search of the farm found the bodies of several men, all killed with a .22 caliber rifle, later found in the house. Lists written by Faye were found on the wall, with marks next to the names indicating work. The investigation concluded that she kept track of the victims and assisted her husband. In 1990, the court found her guilty of 5 murders and sentenced her to death, despite the defense's arguments about her subordinate position. A year later, Raymond Copeland received the same sentence and accepted it calmly, with irony. He died in prison in 1993 of natural causes. Faye continued to seek a review of the case, and in 1999 her death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment without parole. In 2002, after a severe stroke, she was released on medical grounds. She died on December 23, 2003, in a nursing home at the age of 82. Thomas and Jackie Hawks lived the life many only dream of, peacefully, far from the hustle and bustle of the city, enjoying the sea and freedom. Tom, a former probation officer, and his wife Jackie, an energetic and kind woman, spent several years traveling along the coast on their yacht, well deserved. For them, it was a dream come true. They raised their children, secured a peaceful life for themselves, and found harmony with each other and with the world. But in the fall of 2004, their journey came to a tragic end, due to someone else's greed and deceit. In November of that year, the couple decided to sell their yacht to settle on land and be closer to their newborn grandson. A young man named Skylar DeLeon contacted them through the sale advertisement. He introduced himself as a successful businessman and came with his pregnant wife, Jennifer, and their child, giving the impression of a happy family. Tom and Jackie, trusting and open-minded, agreed to show him the yacht.
They had no idea that this was the beginning of a carefully planned scam. In fact, Skylar, whose real name was John Julius Jacobson Jr., was a man with a questionable past. He once dreamed of an acting career and even appeared in episodes of the series Power Rangers. But fame did not come. After a series of failures, he turned to fraud, gradually drawing his wife into his affairs. Together, they lived off scams and debts. But DeLeon wanted more. The Hawks' yacht seemed like a chance to get rich quick. To carry out his plan, he enlisted 2 acquaintances, Alonzo McChain and John Fitzgerald Kennedy. They were supposed to help him with the deal. On November 15, 2004, Tom and Jackie Hawks set sail from Newport Harbor for the last time, thinking they were showing the boat to buyers. On board were Skylar, Jennifer, McChain, and Kennedy. Once the yacht had left the shore, the situation changed. The couple were forced to sign documents transferring ownership rights, and then, under threat, were held on deck. After that, the criminals threw them into the sea, weighted down with an anchor. The Hawks never returned. The yacht soon appeared in port, but its owners were nowhere to be seen. A few weeks later, the family raised the alarm. Tom and Jackie were not answering their phones or coming home. The investigation began when someone tried to use their bank account in Mexico. The police quickly tracked down Skylar DeLeon. He claimed that he had bought the yacht honestly, and that the couple had allegedly gone traveling, but forged documents and witness testimony destroyed this version of events. The turning point in the investigation came when Alonzo McChain decided to cooperate with the investigation. He told how it all happened, how the Hawks were forced to sign the papers, and how their lives ended at sea.
His confessions allowed the truth to be established and confirmed the involvement of the other participants. The trials lasted several years. In 2006, Jennifer Henderson was found guilty and sentenced to 2 life terms without parole. Despite her claims that she was unaware of her husband's plan, the evidence showed otherwise. She was the one who helped create the appearance of an honest deal. In 2008, Skylar DeLeon was tried. He pleaded guilty but asked for a lighter sentence, claiming that the crime was related to personal internal problems and a desire to change his life. However, the court did not accept these arguments. For the murders of Thomas and Jackie Hawks, as well as another man, John Yarvey, Skylark was sentenced to death. A year later, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who was found to be an accomplice to the crimes, was also sentenced to death. Alonzo McChain, who made a deal with the investigation, received 20 years in prison and was released in 2021.
Myron Gardner, who helped indirectly, avoided murder charges by pleading guilty to accessory after the fact.
Roger Dale Stafford went down in American criminal history as one of the most ruthless criminals of the 20th century. A man whose life became a chain of deception, violence, and lies. His actions in 1978 shook Oklahoma and became a symbol of the loss of human compassion. He was born on November 4th, 1951, and grew up in a poor Southern family. From an early age, he was withdrawn and quick-tempered. Without an education or steady work, he got into trouble with the law early on and started living on the edge, wandering around, stealing, and looking for easy ways to make money. Later, fate brought him together with a woman named Verna, who became his partner and accomplice. Together, they traveled around the country, surviving on small-time scams. Stafford committed his first known crime on January 12, 1974, in Alabama. His victim was a young restaurant employee who happened to cross his path. Roger attacked him and took money from the cash register. The amount was small, but that was when his bloody history began. The case remained unsolved for a long time, until years later, when Verna confessed that her husband was the attacker. By that time, Stafford was already awaiting the death penalty for other murders. By 1978, Roger and his companions, his wife Verna and his brother Harold, were traveling through Oklahoma. On June 22nd, they attacked Melvin and Linda Lorenz and their 12-year-old son, Richard. On the side of Interstate 35, Verna pretended to have car trouble to stop passers-by. When the Lorenz family stopped to help, Roger threatened them with a gun and demanded money. After that, the entire family was killed. The car and belongings were stolen, and the criminals fled. 3 weeks later, Stafford committed another crime. On July 16, 1978, he, Verna, and Harold went to the Sirloin Stockade restaurant in Oklahoma City. Late in the evening, when the restaurant was closing, they broke in. 7 employees were there at the time. The criminals took the cash and opened fire, leaving no witnesses. Among the dead were teenagers and adults, ordinary employees who were just doing their jobs. This tragedy became one of the most high-profile cases in the state's history. The city was shocked, and investigators launched a nationwide manhunt. A few days later, Roger's brother Harold died in a motorcycle accident. When the woman who came to identify the body turned out to be Verna Stafford, the police became suspicious. After her arrest, she confessed, describing in detail all the crimes, including the attack on the Lorenz family. Roger was arrested in Chicago, where he had fled after his brother's death. He was taken to Oklahoma, where a high-profile trial took place. Verna became the prosecution's key witness and told everything without hiding any details. She claimed that her husband had planned the attacks and that she and Harold had obeyed him. The jury found Roger Stafford guilty of 9 murders, 3 members of the Lorenz family, and 6 restaurant employees. On October 17, 1979, the court handed down the sentence: death by electric chair. Verna received 2 life sentences for complicity. Stafford himself denied his guilt to the end, claiming that he had been framed. Even while in prison, he tried to start a new life. He married twice and wrote letters, but nothing changed the outcome. On July 1st, 1995, Roger Dale Stafford was executed. He did not admit guilt or apologize. However, 2 days after the execution, the prosecutor's office received a strange letter sent from prison. Inside was a gift certificate for the Sirloin Stockade restaurant and a short note signed by Stafford, in which he claimed he was innocent. It is still unknown whether he wrote this letter himself before his death, or whether someone did it after him.
But the story of Roger Dale Stafford remains one of the darkest pages in U.S. criminal history, an example of how human cruelty and greed can destroy everything human in a person.
Charles Raymond Starkweather was born on November 24th, 1938, in Lincoln, Nebraska, into a modest working-class family. He was the fourth of 7 children born to Guy and Helen Starkweather. His father suffered from joint disease and was often unable to work, while his mother worked as a waitress to support her children. From an early age, Charles was teased because of his limp and speech impediment. This made him withdrawn and quick-tempered. Over time, he learned to take revenge on his tormentors and began to see hostility in the world around him. Gradually, he developed a deep hatred for people he considered more fortunate than himself. At school, the only subject in which he felt confident was physical education. Here he felt the control and power that he lacked in everyday life. His friends recalled that Charles could be friendly and even cheerful, but at any moment he could turn into an aggressive person if something did not go his way. In 1956, at the age of 18, he met 13-year-old Carol Ann Fugate. She attended school nearby, and Charles often picked her up after class. She became the center of his world, the only person who made him feel important. But the relationship quickly took a painful turn. Starkweather was jealous, controlling, and unable to express his feelings. When Carol crashed his father's car, his father kicked Charles out of the house, and the young man turned his back on his family and society for good. He dropped out of school, got a job as a garbage collector, and increasingly talked about how unfair life was. His worldview became increasingly bleak. He claimed that the world was corrupt and that people were all the same in the face of death. These thoughts gradually turned into a justification for violence. On November 30th, 1957, he committed his first murder. At a gas station in Lincoln, he got into an argument with station employee Robert Culvert, who refused to sell him something on credit. Later that night, Charles returned with a gun, forced the young man to give him money, and drove him out of town. There, a conflict arose that ended in tragedy. This was the beginning of a series of crimes that soon spread across several states. On January 21st, 1958, Starkweather arrived at the Fugate family home, despite warnings from Carol's parents to stay away. When the girl's mother and stepfather, Velda and Marion Bartlett, tried to kick him out, he attacked them. The couple's young daughter, 2-year-old Betty Jean, was also killed. Charles then waited for Carol and told her that her family was in danger. The girl believed him, or pretended to believe him. They stayed in the house for several days until the neighbors began to suspect something was wrong. Thus began their journey on the run. The first person they met on their way was Farmer August Meyer, an acquaintance of the family. He became their next victim. Then the couple stopped a car with 2 teenagers, Robert Jensen and Carol King, who offered to help. The young people never returned home. Later, Charles and Carol headed to Lincoln, where they broke into the home of wealthy industrialist Chester Ward. The maid and the owner's wife were in the house. When Ward himself returned later, he was also killed. The couple took jewelry and a car to escape. News of the series of murders quickly spread across the country, causing panic in Nebraska. The city of Lincoln was deserted. Residents armed themselves, and the authorities declared a state of emergency. Crossing the Wyoming border, the fugitives encountered another traveler, salesman Merle Collison. They took his car, but it soon stalled. When a passing driver offered to help, Charles tried to threaten him. At that moment, the sheriff appeared.
Carol ran out of the car and shouted that Starkweather was holding her by force. After a short chase, he was arrested. He surrendered, thinking he was seriously injured, although it turned out to be only a superficial wound. Michelle Lynn Mish was born in the United States, and for many years lived a life no different from millions of others. A simple working-class woman with no education and no stable future. She changed jobs frequently, lived in cheap apartments, and barely made ends meet. Over time, alcohol, addiction, and constant problems with the law entered her life. In the mid-1990s, Michelle found herself on the brink, devoid of purpose, surrounded by people who were just as lost as she was. It was during this period that she met the man who would ultimately destroy her life, James Anthony DeVeggio, a man with a criminal past and a reputation for being aggressive and dangerous. Davajo, known in his circle by the nickname Frog, already had a criminal record for sex crimes. He was older than Michelle, rude, but knew how to come across as a confident leader. For a woman accustomed to dependence and fear, he became both her lover and the center of power in her life. Together, they began using illegal substances and soon sought out increasingly extreme forms of pleasure and domination. Their union turned into a toxic relationship where power and violence merged into one. By the end of the 1990s, the couple already had their own scheme. They called it The Hunt, as if what was happening was a game rather than a crime. DeVeggio and Michelle drove around California in a green Dodge Caravan converted into a closed space where everything inside was under DeVeggio's control. There were metal restraints, ropes, and cameras. Everything they needed to act out their dark fantasies. They recorded some of their attacks on videotape, later claiming that they were private films. In the fall of 1997, their game became systematic. Investigators later determined that several women had managed to escape, and 2 of the victims were acquaintances of the couple. But on December 6, 1997, it all ended in tragedy. That morning, 22-year-old Vanessa Lee Sampson, a student and insurance company employee from Pleasanton, was on her way to work. She was energetic, sociable, and dreamed of saving up for college and moving to San Francisco. When Davajo and Micho's van stopped next to her, she probably did not sense any danger. Outwardly, they were a normal couple. But within seconds, the girl found herself trapped. Vanessa remained captive for several hours. According to the investigation, the criminals took her to a mountainous area near South Lake Tahoe. Vanessa was raped and humiliated, and later killed. Her body was found a few days later on the side of the highway, partially covered by snow. The investigation progressed rapidly. Shortly before that, Davajo and Micho had kidnapped and beaten a student from Reno, and it was her testimony that helped the police track them down. On December 3, 1997, Michelle was arrested at a motel in State Line, and a few hours later, Davajo was detained at a nearby casino. The police found dozens of pieces of evidence in their van: fingerprints, traces of blood, handcuffs, videotapes, and books about serial killers. Among the items found was a deck of cards with images of famous murderers. The couple kept them as a collection. Michelle left a note on one of the cards. "Someday, we'll be here." At the trial, prosecutor Angela Backers described the crime as pure evil. According to her, Davaho and Michelle viewed everything that was happening as entertainment. In their notes, they referred to the attacks as adventures, and themselves as hunting partners. On May 6, 2002, the court found both of them guilty of first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. The jury concluded that the crime was committed with particular cruelty and was premeditated. A month later, they recommended the death penalty for both defendants.
During the sentencing, the victim's brother, Vincent Sampson, placed a photograph of his sister on the table and addressed the killers. "You are pure evil, and you deserve to die."
Paul Kenneth Bernardo is one of the darkest names in Canadian criminal history. His story is not just a chronicle of violence, but an example of how evil can hide behind an attractive appearance, confident manners, and charisma. In the 1980s and 1990s, Bernardo's name became a symbol of horror and betrayal of trust. A charming young man from the suburbs of Toronto turned out to be a serial criminal who struck fear into the entire country. He was born on August 27, 1964, in Scarborough, into a middle-class family. As a child, Paul seemed like a normal kid, polite, smiling, hardworking. He participated in school activities, played sports, and was a member of the Boy Scouts. Neighbors remembered him as a model boy. But behind this facade lay an inner darkness. His family environment contributed to this. His father was rude and prone to violence. His mother suffered from depression and lived in isolation.
The home, which should have been a place of love, became a source of shame, humiliation, and repressed emotions. When Paul learned that his biological father was another man, his worldview changed. He began to despise his mother, accusing her of betrayal. In adolescence, this feeling turned into aggression and misogyny. He began to consider women weak and used his charm as a tool of manipulation. Even in college, Paul stood out for his cold confidence and need for attention. He was called the man with the perfect smile. But many of the girls who dated him later admitted that they felt anxious and afraid around him. In 1987, a series of attacks on young women began in Scarborough. The criminal acted boldly and ruthlessly, and soon the media gave him the nickname, the Scarborough Rapist. The police collected evidence and interviewed witnesses, but were unable to catch the culprit. It is noteworthy that Bernardo was among the suspects several times. He was even questioned, and DNA samples were taken. But the analysis was delayed, and he remained at large. In October 1987, he met Karla Homolka, a 17-year-old girl from a respectable veterinarian's family. There was immediate chemistry between them, but the relationship quickly took a perverse turn. Paul became dominant, and Karla submitted, considering it a manifestation of love. Together, they formed a union in which dependence, violence, and self-deception were intertwined. Later, journalists would call them Ken and Barbie from hell, a beautiful couple who hid a monster behind their smiles. Their crimes began with psychological games and gradually turned into real violence. The first tragedy occurred within the family, an event that Canada only learned about after Karla's arrest. In the following years, the couple kidnapped and tortured young women, carefully covering their tracks.
Their lifestyle: a clean house, well-groomed appearance, parties with friends, contrasted with what was happening behind closed doors. For a long time, the police were unable to connect the attacks of the Scarborough rapist with the disappearances of the girls. It was only in 1993, when DNA analysis of old samples was carried out, that everything became clear. Bernardo and the Scarborough rapist were one and the same person. By this point, Carla could no longer withstand the pressure. After a violent conflict with Paul, she ran away and went to the police. Her confession shocked the investigators. She told them about years of crimes, described their joint actions, and pointed out where to look for evidence. Dozens of videotapes were found in Bernardo's house, on which the couple had recorded their attacks. These tapes became the main evidence in court. The trial lasted for months and became a national sensation. Newspapers published daily reports, television broadcast expert commentary, and the public debated whether Carla was a victim or an accomplice. She made a deal with the prosecution, agreeing to testify against Paul in exchange for a 12-year sentence. This caused a storm of indignation. Many believed that her guilt was much more serious.